Good evening, listeners. This is Larry King Live, snooch to the nooch to ya. I'm sitting across the table from this guy, this gentleman. Sorry to break stride like that. I'm sitting across from gentleman Captain Fillmore, William Maher of the local fun police. Fillmore, how are you doing?
Doing good. How you doing?
I've heard rumblings that you are very against comics and media for adults. How do you stand, sir?
I don't stand for it. Superheroes, comics, anything. All those dumb little movies, explosions. It's all for kids.
What about it is for children?
It's flashy. Too many colors.
Is that it?
Yeah, that's about it.
I was like, we could go. I was gonna see how. It's too many colors. Anything else? No.
I got nothing else.
Well,
if I had to admit, my argument's not very sound. I just think it's dumb.
Comics were written by the government to brainwash our children, and better yet, our adult men, to turn them into liberal-loving, Hillary Clinton-supporting, chemical-in-the-water-sipping crazy people.
I don't know what he's having, but
I want it. Buy my supplements. Oh, gosh. He's not even around anymore. I forgot he disappeared.
yeah, please don't take us down.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. You can take us down for any other reason, but not for impersonating.
You can take us down for liking comics.
Yeah. That's,
Or superheroes.
That's okay.
Yeah,
I understand that.
That is.
Want to dive in?
Yeah, I'm back to being Phil now, not Richard
Fillmore. Richard
Bubbly
Fillmore.
or whatever
Richard
his name
Fillmore Bubbly. Richard Fillmore Bubbly. Here on the podcast.
Wasn't Richard Fillmore president?
I think he was.
Yeah.
Anyway, kick us off, sir.
Pull it up on the screen.
Young Jamie, can you see if...
Just pull up everything on the screen.
Young Jamie, can you check in on Richard Fillmore?
Oh, gosh. What up, punks? Welcome back to another episode of the Pop Culture Punks podcast, where we bring pop culture to you, the people.
The people.
This week, we'll be discussing some statements Bill Maher has made in the wake of Stan Lee's death last year, and what we think he did. What do you think he said?
We know what he did.
What we think about what he said and whether we think it was right or wrong. Are superheroes just for kids? Can comics be enjoyed by all regardless of age? Are certain mediums meant to be age-gated? Will the pop culture punks ever grow up and talk about adult stuff?
Never.
Like what we read in the newspaper this morning while drinking coffee in our robes.
Did you?
Or the numbers on the stock market. Or how great that sports game was around the water cooler with all the other adults.
I like it.
Find out here after these quick updates. What have you been up to this week?
Honestly, not too much. I've been catching up.
Adult.
I've been being an adult. Been paying my car insurance. I've been catching up on the Hardy Boys. Gosh, what else did he say in that that article? Adulting? I've just been straight adulting, Philip.
Adulting? Gosh dang it.
Taking down the regime. Fighting back.
The thing I hate more about the adulting movement is people's reactions to the adulting movement, like Bill Maher.
Yeah.
But we'll get to that.
We'll get there. No, so jokes aside, I have been paying my auto insurance, so it's not that hard. I never thought it was. But I've been playing Diablo 3 actually. So the season 16 for the
that's a lot of seasons.
Yeah, so they do it based on like gear, so it's kind of like as if it's kind of like with Fortnite where they roll over into the next season, and then when the next season rolls over, there's like new skins that you can unlock and stuff like that.
Are they themed like Fortnite?
I don't think so.
Okay.
But I've liked it's been fun. The last season I came in right at the tail end, so I kind of like tried to beat the first round of achievements, but in order to get this season's gear, you have to do achievements that are in the later tiers. Mm-hmm. And because I only had like 4 days to get in on the last season, I wasn't going to spend all that time.
So you can't go back and do the previous season? No.
So once that season is done, it's done. So,
is most of the gear cosmetic that you can get?
yes.
So it's
Yeah,
not
I
like
think so.
you're gonna miss out on like the most powerful thing
I
ever.
don't think so. I'm just kind of playing it because I don't know, it's fun. I think I had mentioned it when I talked about it right after our Christmas episode. But I think what's nice about it is a lot of the stuff is gated at level 70. So once you hit level 70, which I think is your max, so that's when stuff starts like opening up and there's a lot more challenges around that level. There is it's a very quick turnaround to get from like level 1 to level 70, like in maybe 6 hours, like between like 3 days. So I maybe played like 2 hours a day since Friday. And I hit like level 43 already.
Oh,
so
dang.
so it's a pretty quick turnaround, and I haven't even been trying to be that efficient. It was just
Is
kind
it
of like
exponential? So like it's gonna take you about the same time now to get.
well, that's the dope thing is they have what you can do is you can go right into adventure mode, which just opens up the entire map, every mission, every area, every whatever. And so some have lots of monsters and stuff. And the way Diablo works is there's EXP multipliers for how many kills you get. And so like the whole point of Diablo basically to get more EXP and get better gear and to grind stuff is you lead hordes of monsters into bigger hordes of monsters. So you rack up like 200 kill streak or whatever. So it takes some skill to actually like lead, like 30 or 40 into like a big room, and then just like you have to be strong enough to be able to handle them all quickly. And that's kind of the thing is you get your stats higher so you can kill more stuff quickly and then stuff like that. But what's sweet is they have, I think it goes all the way up to like mega insane or something like that. But there's like normal, there's hard, there's expert, there's like veteran, and then there's like crazy, and I don't know if that's the actual name, but then there's even more things. But in those higher difficulties, there's actually like, I think normal, you don't get any EXP or any percentage increase in drops. Hard, there's a 75 or like plus 75% increase or something. The like expert is like 150% increase. So if you want to, the goal is as you get better and you get stronger gear, like building up through the levels, you then jump to higher difficulties, because then you get more EXP on top of then doing those mob chains basically. And so the nice thing is you can go pretty fast. So I haven't broken the cusp to jump into the next tier really soundly, but I think I'm pretty close to being able to do that. So
that's cool.
I've been doing a lot of that because I'm hoping that
are you playing on the Switch?
Yes, playing on Switch, which, dude, it's so nice. Like we were at a company weekend for my job Friday night, and so like I just brought my Switch backpack and like set it up in the hotel room, and
yeah, buddy,
like when we were not doing stuff around the Capitol or whatever, we were just kind of hanging out. So
cool.
So it's fun. Other than that, that's pretty much been the gist. Catching up on Gears 2, so I think I'm a little over halfway done. So I forgot how much the story and everything takes a really quick turn in a better a better light.
I like the story a lot more in this one. Yeah. I just pretty much like everything more about this one.
Yep.
I still have some gripes about it, but we'll get to that next week.
Yep. And then I will probably post them on Twitter and maybe on Instagram as well, or maybe the page one will. But I found 2 really awesome videos that they're fairly short, but they go pretty deep into the lore of Gears and like the pendulum wars and like what those were and like who the locusts actually are and all these different things that are going on. And it's really interesting. Like to me, it completely blew open how complex this world really is actually, in a kind of like a cool way.
Interesting.
Because I think the game gets to it in a certain extent, but not as much as I think you'd like it to. Like in the sheer story, like I think you'd like more callbacks.
I wonder if
is
there like supplemental books that people are getting this stuff from?
I think there's a lot of in-game items and stuff.
Okay, like if you actually read all those journals and piece things together, I think pick them up and don't.
Yeah, I think it's in a way it's kind of BioShocky in that sense, where it's got a lot of stuff that if you go and dig through a lot of those things, you'll be able to find it. But I don't think it's inherent in everything that's going on.
It's not the point of the story.
Exactly.
Okay.
But I've been since watching those videos, I've been like, holy crap! Like this is actually pretty complex, and not in a way of like, oh, this is, overcomplicated. It's more just like, wow, there's some things that might change your mind about the situation of like the whole series and like, what this war actually means and stuff like that. So
it adds more depth to it.
Exactly. It's very, very, very interesting.
Cool.
So
I'll have to
pretty
watch
much been it.
Those. I'm probably going to save them until after I beat 3 because I've never played them before. So
nice.
Cool.
Yeah, that's a good. I was like, oh wow, I remember that, but then remembering some of the things, I was like, holy cow, like this is.
Yeah, there's some heavy moments in 2 where I actually cried. Like I teared up at one of the times.
Yeah,
like,
I think I'm thinking it's the second bigger point. Yeah, it's heavy, and dude, just
so I'm excited to talk about
buckle
it next
up.
week.
Yeah, buckle up for 3. 3 is my favorite on probably.
I'm excited to see the jump too, like what graphically it looks like, because it was kind of cool seeing from 1 to 2, but really cool to see from 2 to 3.
Yep. So that's pretty much it. I really, really, really want to jump into Punisher season 2 soon.
I know.
I've been reading stuff online and people have been saying like this is good. Like this is like what it should have been last season.
Some people are wondering whether they are going to cancel it or not. Because like they've been promoting this show a lot more heavily than they did for any of the other shows, and they've been doing a lot of things that are like uncharacteristic for what they did with the rest of them. So people are wondering if they do have a season 3.
It could be.
I wouldn't complain.
Yeah,
sure.
No, absolutely.
And if you plan on closing it out too, that'd be dope.
Maybe is it one of those things where they looked at the story for some of those other seasons and shows, and they were like, well, we can actually kind of end it, and like people won't get mad, because I could see that happening with like Daredevil. Daredevil kind of closed out with like the gang's back together and we're gonna be lawyers again.
Yeah.
And even with like the Bullseye thing at the end, it doesn't cue you into there's like a whole new branching narrative that's gonna. It isn't even like Fisk breaks out or anything. It's literally like Fisk gets arrested again and they go back to being lawyers.
Yeah.
And so whereas with this, I'm curious if like, also because the content in Punisher I think is probably like Daredevil's pretty brutal, but I think Punisher is a much different brutality that maybe if there is something with Disney that they're like, we're not going to PG-ify that or PG-13ify or whatever they would do.
For sure, yeah. I'm excited to watch it though. I've been hooked on Community still, so.
Nice.
I'm almost to season 4, which is where Dan Harmon leaves, so I'm interested to see.
Kind of the shift.
Yeah, because I've seen it before, but I don't remember thinking it was any worse than the rest of it.
Sure.
But maybe now that I've seen it in a different light with thinking about things more from a creative perspective, maybe I'll notice. But yeah, I talked about that last week because there's like 6 seasons. So
cool.
I'll be watching it for like the next month probably. But that's what's stopping me from watching The Punisher right now. So
sure,
I do need to watch it though, because everything I've seen just has me stoked on it. But to satiate that craving, I've been reading the Punisher comic.
Nice.
It's kind of confusing because there's Welcome Home Frank, which I think is not a part of the series I'm reading, but it's written by the same author.
Yeah.
It's written by Garth Ennis.
Yeah.
But I think he wrote that in like the early 2000s, and then the one I'm reading is Punisher Max.
Oh, nice.
Which it starts similarly because I think in Welcome Home Frank he's in Vietnam, isn't he?
I think. Well, I actually read Welcome Home Frank, so I think. Okay. It's Welcome Home Frank, not Welcome Back Frank.
Or something like that, yeah.
Yeah, I think Welcome Home was actually, there's scenes from that are, I think, used in Daredevil Season 2 and also in the original Thomas Jane. Like, I think Welcome Home Frank is the one where, like, what's his name? It's, like, the giant Russian dude and, like, his, like, neighbors in his apartment or whatever. Mm-hmm. Like, is that the one where he's kind of got some, like, weird neighbors? Like, he has one guy who has, like, a bunch of piercings and...
That was in the... I remember that being in the movie with Tom Jane.
Yeah.
But I don't know what comic.
I think that's in Welcome Home
okay.
Frank, because I think I actually have that one.
You have that?
Shelf. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So the one I'm reading is the one that starts with him in Vietnam, which I think is called Bourne.
Okay.
Punisher Bourne.
Yeah.
Which, oh my gosh, like
intense.
After having seen the movies and the show, like I thought I knew what the Punisher was, but after reading the comic, it puts a whole like different light on like who the character of the Punisher is.
Really?
I think it's just so brutal, like, and it's in some ways like I feel like with the movie and the show, you kind of always still see him as like, no, he's a good guy kind of.
Sure.
But I feel like in the comics they toe that line a lot closer.
Like he really is.
Like, wow, I can't believe he did that. Like,
yeah.
And it's kind of like they keep coming back to this idea that like it's more demented by the fact that he thinks what he's doing is good, and it's like, how do you? And yeah, I've read Bourne, and I got like this Ultimate Collection from the library, and I'm like halfway through it, and it's super good but super brutal.
Super
and
intense,
like
sure.
I really like the idea that he's like towing the line between, like, he's got a very strict line and he will not cross it.
Mm-hmm.
but most other people wouldn't have gone that far even. So it's interesting to
Cool.
see. But the way he builds it up to like where you get that payoff where he finally like just punches that dude's face in and blood splat, like it's kind of like in that moment you're like yes, but like leading up to it you're like when he's talking about doing it you're kind of like questioning whatever. But the way that they paint the bad guys and the way that they kind of like write the narrative and the characters, it like the payoff is just so good. So
Sweet.
I'd highly recommend it.
Definitely.
Especially if you're a fan of The Punisher. Which,
Will do.
Yeah. Probably doesn't take much to convince you.
Nope. No, sir.
And the only other thing, I haven't had a ton of variety this week because of Community and other things, but the only other thing was I watched A Scanner Darkly last night, which is...
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, I think you'd like it, actually.
A Scanner Darkly?
Yeah, it's weird grammatically. It's based off of a verse in Corinthians, I think.
Oh, interesting.
It's a book by Philip Dick.
Okay.
And it's about like the war on drugs and about drug abuse. And it was from 2006, and it's like a sci-fi futuristic movie, and the whole movie is rotoscoped.
Oh,
which is
wild.
Like at first I was like, I don't know if I'm going to like this. This is like the whole movie is like this. It looks weird. And Keanu Reeves is the main character, and it's got Robert Downey, which is like 2 years before he became Iron Man.
Yeah.
And then it's got Woody Harrelson and a couple other characters, and I think you should watch it. It's fascinating.
I'll have to check it out. Is it on a streaming service, or did you have to...
I got it on Blu-ray for Christmas.
Okay, cool.
So I don't know if it's on any other service. You could probably rent it for like $3 off Amazon or something. But it's super good. It's about drug addiction, and it's this guy who's investigating these like druggies and trying to figure out like what's going on. And it's kind of about like identity and losing sense of self, and that I think that's what A Scanner Darkly means. It's kind of like the scanner is the camera, and the movie is about seeing yourself through the lens of a camera and not recognizing who you are, sort of.
Sure.
So it's kind of like,
that makes sense.
I think in the Bible it's like a mirror dimly or something. So like seeing yourself in the mirror but not being able to perceive who you really are because of the mirror being dim or something.
Nice.
So it's kind of about like
cool.
drugs and losing sense of self, and it's super good, and the whole movie is rotoscoped, so it's like that
sounds real intense.
It helps you get in the minds of the people, like how trippy and weird it is to be on like this drug that they're investigating. So it's really cool.
Nice. That sounds dope.
Yeah. So, and then the last thing, I got back into drawing this past week.
Yeah, dude.
After like a super long time, and it's super fun. Like, I feel like it's the only thing where I like actually get lost in it. Like, I'll just sit there and like 2 hours will go by, and I'm like, oh frick, I need to do other things, and I'll like just sit there and draw things. And I'm not very good at drawing freehand, so like right now I've been just practicing by referencing things. So like I pulled out Hellboy and drew a couple panels from that, and then I pulled out The Dark Knight Returns and drew like the iconic like just weird Batman image, which has been taking me like 8 hours to draw, but it looks dope. So it's kind of like reinforcing the idea that I need to draw more so I can write a comic, because I feel like I like drawing a lot more than I like writing, actually. So
cool. No,
yeah, it's been
awesome.
It's been super fun.
Sweet.
So
dope.
That's the main stuff. I haven't done a ton of stuff this week, so other than play Gears and watch.
Yeah, I know. I think I'm really excited to talk about it next week, but I'm also really excited to be done with it.
Gears. Yeah. I want to play other games.
Yep.
I want to play Metro before the new one comes out.
Yeah, I think what's been hard is there's a couple I've been playing on easy just because I'm trying to I've already played them, so I'm trying to just kind of speed through them. But there's been a few points where I'm like, man, this is a lot of fun, and it's just like with the shooting and the gratification of like the Gnasher. I love that freaking thing. But then there's the other parts with we were just talking before we started with like some of the bosses and stuff where you're like, this is back when people didn't actually think about maybe we shouldn't put this boss in this game because it's not good. It's like not a good experience.
Oh, and freaking car scenes.
Yep. Some of the like the driving stuff and
games that aren't car games shouldn't try and put car scenes in them.
No, they should not. but they do.
I'm excited for it to be done and to talk about it. They're fun games, but
definitely
shotgunning all three of them in like a month was a bad idea.
Yeah, well,
do it for the pod.
Yeah, do it for the pod, baby. So it'll be good. I think once you watch the videos and you see some of the depth of like the story, that might be one of the more fun talking points. Is actually like diving through into like some of the stuff that it hints at, but that ain't what we on today.
That ain't what we're on today.
We're on Bill Maher.
So before that, I just wanted to make a reference to, I think I sent it to you, but the Brightburn trailer You watched that, right?
Yeah, holy shnikes,
So
dude.
it's kind of like Superman, but if he ended up being like a villain,
Yep.
sort of, and it looks like really good and horrifying. Like that last scene where that lady's like standing there, like, and he's like floating there, and then just boom. Like,
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
It
looks
just
yeah.
it's gonna be amazing. It makes me so mad that Disney still will not take Sean Penn or
James Gunn.
James Gunn. I was like, I kept saying Sean Penn. I was like, that's not his name. Sean something. James Gunn.
Yeah.
It makes me so ticked that they.
I think he's also directing the sequel to Suicide Squad. So if he can do with that what he did with Guardians,
I could see that being way better than the first, at least, which I don't think is a very high bar to jump over. But
and especially if they're down this track of, okay, the DCEU failed. Let's just do like solo movies now and get good directors to direct them.
Yeah.
If they're down that train now, then I'm back like fully on board. Like, all right, let's do this.
Yep.
So, but yeah, that movie looked dope.
Definitely.
So yeah, get into Bill Maher. So there's two things that he had. There's this original article, which I'll just read through it because I think it's really short.
Yeah.
Just so people can kind of
this is
so people can hear it and we're not misrepresenting it.
Exactly, and this is our context. And this
probably
came out. This was published on Bill Maher's blog, Real Time, on November 17th. Pretty close after Stanley died.
Yeah, and it's called Adulting.
Yeah.
So I'll read through it quick.
Go for it.
The guy who created Spider-Man and the Hulk has died, and America is in mourning. Deep, deep mourning for a man who inspired millions to, I don't know, watch a movie, I guess. Someone on Reddit posted, "I'm so incredibly grateful I lived in a world that included Stan Lee. Personally, I'm grateful I lived in a world that included oxygen and trees, but to each his own. Now, I have nothing against comic books. I read them now and then when I was a kid, and I was all out of Hardy Boys. But the assumption everyone had back then, both the adults and the kids, was that comics were for kids, and when you grew up, you moved on to big boy books without the pictures. But then, 20 years ago or so, something happened. Adults decided they didn't have to give up kid stuff, and so they pretended comic books were actually sophisticated literature, and because America has over 4,500 colleges, which means we need more professors than we have smart people, some dumb people got to be professors by writing theses with titles like Otherness and Heterodoxy in The Silver Surfer. And now, when adults are forced to do grown-up things, like buy auto insurance, they call it adulting, and act like it's some giant struggle. I'm not saying we've necessarily gotten stupider. The average Joe is smarter in a lot of ways than he was in, say, the 1940s, when a big night out was a Three Stooges short and a Carmen Miranda musical. The problem is, we're using our smarts on stupid stuff. I don't think it's a huge stretch to suggest that Donald Trump could only get elected in a country that thinks comic books are important."
So very short.
I tried to read it as condescending as it sounds.
I think you nailed it. There's I watched a couple videos of like other people commenting on it, and interestingly enough, I listened to a number of people who actually politically agree with Bill Maher, who were like, "Screw this guy!" Like, he can get off his high horse. But
I wanted to add a caveat to this. So the reason we're doing this is not because of anything politically. We have our own opinions about stuff, but that's not what the podcast is for. Which it's kind of hard to do when you're talking about somebody whose job
his whole thing
he's
is
a political pundit, basically. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, on that point, like I see a lot of like people in his lane who do not like him just because of how condescending
this kind of
he
thing.
is.
Like this isn't the first. It sounds like, and I was playing a thing earlier before we started for Phil where he went on Larry King shortly after publishing this article, and
which
he basically
is the video I put,
and he basically doubled down on all the things he said, which it was, and again,
the title was clarifies his statements, but he didn't clarify anything.
He just said like,
no, I know what I said.
Yeah, he's like, I know what I said, and I stick by it. So,
and the thing is, like, I honestly, when I read this, wasn't surprised by it.
Oh yeah, not
because
at all.
Like I listen to Bill Maher sometimes because I enjoy listening to people who have differing opinions or who are kind of like set in their ways in a certain certain
absolutely.
sense. The thing is, like, he thinks he's a comedian, and he always like, and he was at one point, and but he always uses that as an excuse for saying stuff like this. He's like, "Oh, people can't take a joke these days," and it's like, okay, if you would have said this at any other time, people wouldn't have been as offended. People would have just brushed it off. But you said it in the wake of somebody dying and made it seem like that was the thing he clarified with Larry King, was that he didn't mean it as like a jest towards Stan Lee, but it's like, what else did you mean it as? You released this thing in the immediate wake of him dying. Like, if you would have released this like 3 months later, people would have definitely, I think people would have been less offended by it.
I agree.
They would have just been like, classic Bill Maher, just going off again.
Yeah,
shaking his fist at the clouds.
Right.
So I feel like that was his first big problem, was just the timeliness of it.
Yeah, and I think so. Also, the other thing too is we also know that we're like 2 or 3 months late on this, and I think the part of the reason is we wanted to talk about it, but we already planned stuff. But also too, I think we really don't want this discussion to be about attacking someone that we don't agree with. We very much want it to be like, there are specific ideas that are present in his statement that not just Bill Maher, but other people share, and just talking about how our culture has really shifted, because there is absolutely a time where Dungeons and Dragons, I think on our episode with Mr. Bears, he talked about that, where like there was a time where like Dungeons and Dragons was really faux pas, and if you liked certain things, it was very like, you're like, what's wrong with you? Like you're like weird and strange, and now we're in a time where it's totally cool to be, down with like comics and comic book movies, and the fact that like Marvel movies are some of the highest grossing in the box office, or just superheroes in general, I think is really cool. And
and I think the thing that's confusing about what he said is he's conflating so many different things
100%
as one argument. Like it's confusing. So I don't know where you want to start with the actual discussion.
I know there's I think maybe what we can do is just jump into some of the things that kind of stood out from his statements, and then from there's kind of like bigger questions and things like that. So I think one of the things that is not nuanced in what he said, that I do actually agree with, is he didn't actually suggest this, but it's something that I think about a lot, which is pop culture is great. It's a lot of fun, but there is a very, very sad reality that for a lot of people, these fictional worlds and these fictional mediums do too much and are way, 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 way too important to people. So that's why you get people freaking out over like, they can't change this character and they can't do this. And it's not the same idea, but there is a sense of like immature, juvenile behavior that is still prevalent in pop culture communities, I think.
You see it with Star Wars, and you see it with Rick and Morty, and you see it with comic books when they change the gender or race or whatever.
Right, and people freak out, and I think...
And there's different levels of rightness or wrongness with those things. I'm not making a statement on...
Totally. So I think with that, like, there is a reality that pop culture, I think at least in my mind, this is my opinion, is we as people engaging with it and making it and enjoying it need to have a balance, which I think the majority does, is this is something as like a hobby in the same way that someone might do like gardening as a hobby, or fishing as a hobby, or hunting as a hobby, or, sports as a hobby, like whatever. There's hundreds of hobbies out there. This is just one that,
Yeah, and I think like the problem isn't that there are people doing that. The problem is that he insinuates that the people who are doing that are the majority of
exactly
people. Like
right.
The adults who are going to see the Marvel movies are
like don't pay taxes and like don't work, and they're just like your stereotypical like don't shower.
And I think like because of the internet, just with everything, like you tend to see the louder voices, the people whining and complaining about different things. And even in that sense, like I don't think some people are doing it seriously in a sense. Mm-hmm. So there's probably an even smaller fraction of people who are like literally like their day and their life are ruined because you screwed up their character.
Right.
And more so there's some people who just like put a little bit more stock in certain things than others. Like when Fallout 76 just trashed the Fallout series with that release, I was a little offended. I was like, why, like, how could you release trash like this and still call yourself a good company?
Right.
And so like, I think there's varying levels where it's like, at some point as a consumer, we need to say, no, you're releasing actual like bad quality stuff. Or The Last Jedi, like at some point you got to say, like, you got to stand up and say, like, as a consumer, I'm not paying for this crap anymore.
Right. Exactly.
And so generally that should just be done with your wallet, and you just should stop giving them
Shut
money.
up about it. Yeah.
And if I'm still willing to give him money, then I should shut up, basically. And so I think that's where the problem might come in, is like people put a lot of stock in different things to varying degrees. And the people who are like super invested in things tend to bubble up to the top because everybody else is just like, okay, I'm a little mad that they changed this, but it's not worth yelling at my family and friends who don't give two craps about it.
Exactly, yeah.
Like they brought up how they like this movie at family dinner, and I blew up on them because it's the dumbest and most, like, I don't know, like something like that. So,
or like, I won't talk to my uncle anymore because he like, liked The Last Jedi and it's his favorite movie, or things like, I mean, that's probably even more hyperbolic than what actually has happened.
Yeah.
Maybe not, but I think
and overall, I get the sense that he's writing this article to those people.
Yeah, exactly.
But because he says they're the reason that Donald Trump got elected, it makes me think he thinks those people are like the majority of people.
Right, exactly.
But like, if we're being honest and we're stereotyping a little bit, like, I feel like Donald Trump voters
probably
in general,
don't watch,
are agreeing with him. They're like, yeah, that's kid stuff.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
like,
which is the irony.
I feel like, so it's kind of like I don't know who he's really talking to at the end of the day. Like you said, we kind of get it. Like we get that there's a subculture within pop culture of like holding things too tightly to the chest, which is partially why we started this, because we wanted to just be carefree about it. But yeah.
And I think the other so the question that kind of spawned from that is, so my to sum up my thought on it was like, I think he creates a valid criticism, and not well, but to the degree that there needs to be a balance, and I think our culture needs to strike a balance between entertainment and escapism. And I think, especially in the West, escapism is a huge, huge, huge reality that I think is, he doesn't like, he kind of meant like when he goes off on the like, adulting is hard and like, paying car insurance and stuff like that. It's like, I know people who aren't into pop culture who are just really obnoxious and childish. Like there's all these assumptions that it's like, well, all the kids who like can't pay their car insurance or do these things and like are adulting are the kids who read Batman comics and watch Marvel movies. It's like, no, I also know people who were never told to do anything and never had to work a job until they graduated college, and like
it's the conflating thing again.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
He's conflating two things. Is like those aren't maybe correlated, but they're not there's no
exactly.
causation.
There's no causation.
Yeah, comic books aren't causing people to be inept.
Right, exactly. It's like, no, I read Batman, so I don't know how to pay for my house. Like, that's it's the assumptions like that come across that are really condescending and not. It's like, it's when I was reading through it again, and I remember when I first read it, I was like mad, and I think when I was saying, one of the reasons we also didn't go after this right when it came out is because I think there was a lot of emotion of like, how dare he and blah blah blah, but just sitting on it,
we wanted to temper our
like we wanted to temper, and it's like I'm still frustrated that someone feels the need, especially with someone like Bill Maher. And granted, again, this is just his MO, like this is what he does, so I'm not surprised. But I think
there's literally a coffee mug on the right here that says
"But I'm not wrong."
I'm not wrong.
Yeah, I'm looking at the webpage. But yeah, no. So I think a lot of me is just like, why? Like why? Like where does the need for this come from? Like why do you need to trash on people who do this?
I think he just
and
wanted attention at the time.
Oh yeah,
his show was off air. He wanted a little buzz.
Yeah, exactly. So
if
what
we're
do you
being
do?
honest.
Oh yeah, no, totally. And so what do? You go after all the people who are sad that there's a icon that, and I mean that's the thing is I think again there's so many things that it's like I just don't understand why people have to do stuff like this, and not just him but anybody. Like why do you have to? You can totally not like stuff, you can totally not be a fan of certain things, but why do you have to go after and basically insinuate that comic book readers are the reason Donald Trump's America exists? Like it's just things like that where we're not going to dive into political things, but just like statements like that, you're like, I don't get that. I don't get how in your brain you can just be like, yeah, that's exactly why certain things happened, or like.
Well, and I think specifically with this, it seems to come down to pull it back a little bit. Like he admits he doesn't know anything about comics,
right?
Like he's only ever read comic books when he was a child.
Yeah. Like
there's plenty of comics that you could read that would actually show you that like comic books can be on the same level as books, but you admit you're ignorant on the topic, and yet you still decide to comment on it. And you conflate a bunch of things and make like there are legitimate problems, like we're saying, with pop culture and different things. But because he knows nothing about the industry or about actual comic books, he's conflating it with the idea that the majority of these people who just want to escape for a little while after work, like, I feel like the modern man or woman or whatever, like, they come home from work, they want to sit on their couch and watch 30 minutes of TV to wind down. Some people watch sports, some people watch reality TV, some people watch sitcoms, some people watch whatever, some people want to read comic books, some people want to play video games.
Right.
Like, it's all just entertainment, and in moderation, escapism isn't a bad thing. Escapism can help people, like help people with a crappy job, or help people who are depressed, or help people who have anxiety. Like, those things are all like clinically shown to actually work. But he kind of, because he knows nothing about the industries, he conflates it with like, oh, the majority of these adults who are playing video games and reading kids' books, like, they're all stupid and voted for like, like they're the reason our society is downfalling. I'm like,
exactly.
If you actually think that, like, you are admitting you almost know nothing about anything.
Right, exactly.
Like, if you think that's the reason Donald Trump is president, like, I don't want to get into politics, but I think you need to do a little more research.
Yeah, I think we need to think this one through a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, it's a little.
So I feel like that's his first downfall, is he basically admits he knows nothing.
Yeah.
And yet he still chooses to comment on it.
Yeah.
And that's to me, that was the most offensive and frustrating part, was like, I don't care if you say stuff like this, but don't say it if you know nothing. Like,
right.
Just, like, don't talk about stuff you don't know about.
And then double down on it twice. Like,
yeah.
And I think literally people were poking at him in the Larry King interview that he did, where in this article he says, like, I read comic books when I was a kid, but in the interview Larry asks him, like, well, you know, did you ever read comic books? He's like, no. And you're like, wait, what? Like, he basically says in the interview, like, I never did. And so you're kind of like, well, like, do you,
so you're basing your whole argument on an assumption about comic books, not about the reality of
right.
You know.
To me, what this came across as, and it's literally, it's just laughable. Like, reading it now, it's just like, I imagine like the stereotypical character in cartoons and other shows, which I guess I'm a child, Bill, but like, you know, the stereotypical rich guy who's like, no, all these poor people, no, look at all my money. And it's, for him, it's like, my intellect is so big because I listen to Mozart. And like, he strikes me as the guy that there are certain parts of culture and the world that if you want to be seen as educated and you want to be seen and valued as being intelligent and stuff, you don't watch cartoons, you don't read comics, you don't
it's
watch
like the elitist,
superhero
like,
movies.
you go to museums and look at high art, which there's nothing wrong with any of that stuff, but like, to say any of that stuff is more important than other certain aspects of culture.
Yeah, and I think it completely misses the point of like what those mediums are trying to do, which to me is, you know, like his dumbing down of just saying, like, the funny thing is I do kind of agree with his college thing with like some of the professors, but that's a whole different story.
Yeah, even with that, he's still conflating different things, because
exactly.
He suggests that there's nothing important in comic books, but like, the whole point of Silver Surfer is that he's like an other being, and like, that's a part of his character,
right?
And so like, but
yeah,
you can go on what you were going on.
Yeah, I think like with the idea, sorry, I lost my train of thought, but I completely spaced. It's all good. I'm sorry. So riled up. No, it's all good. No, I think part of like where I'm hitched is I don't even know what to do with this, like, in a way, because it's, I think what's frustrating and why we wanted to talk about it and why I wanted to talk about it isn't necessarily to say like, well, we know better and he's wrong, but it's more to say like, why is he wrong, or why do I think he's wrong? And I think one of the big reasons is, and this, all right, I found it. Going back to what I was thinking is, I think his statements around, you know, like, they're just picture books and they're kids stuff, I think it takes out so much depth in what's actually there. Like, when you're looking at it, you know, for your average person who just maybe consumes them, like, yeah, maybe they're just picture books. But to us, especially as people who are like trying to make them and who dive into the process and figuring out, how do I lay out a panel correctly? How do I draw people's, like, you're having to be a graphic designer. You're having to be an artist to know human anatomy. You're having to be a psychologist to know the proper story beats of, you know, not just written storytelling, but visual storytelling of like, how do I get people to feel something as it, you know, as the story progresses, what's working, what's not. You have to have the technical fidelity to be able to create all that stuff. You have to have a critical mind and self-examine, like, this is bad, I need to cut this. This is good, I need to amplify this.
It's kind of funny because I was talking with Evan like last week or 2 weeks ago, and we were talking about comics and how I want to write one, and she was asking like, well, how do they like tell the story? Like, how do you put words and kind of like move the narrative along? And I kind of thought about it, and I was like, you actually really don't. Like, most other than dialogue, most of the story is actually told through like the how you draw the art and how you display the panels. And like, to me, that was like, that's mind-boggling. Like, like when you're reading the comic, you don't think about it, but like they're telling you an entire story just through pictures.
Yeah.
And like, you could reduce that down to it's just a picture book. But
basically.
Like, even kids' picture books, they're not telling the story through the pictures. They're just telling you the story through words in the simplest way possible. And there's pictures. Like, but in comic books, they're telling you stories through pictures.
Right.
And you could comment on whether or not you think those stories have value or those stories tell something meaningful. But isn't that the whole point of analyzing them in the first place? Not to just reduce them down to like their base or whatever.
Right.
Like, I'm not going to say the next new Hulk comic is like high art or anything.
Right.
But like, to say because of that, all other comic books that have ever been written are off the table as well. I don't know.
It's just silly.
It's dumb. Yeah. There's so much more there that he doesn't pick apart. And it comes back to like, he just doesn't know anything about it.
Right.
And why is he talking about it?
Right. Well, I think what's fascinating is like he never lists, and I think this is what's equally frustrating is you can totally tell that this was a defensive answer in a way because he doesn't list any of his own things that he actually considers he attacks comics and says comics can't be considered high art.
Yeah, what do you do for fun?
But he doesn't
what do you like?
Yeah, he doesn't say like what is high art, which to me is fascinating because it's like, well, to me that just says you don't have a well organized thought then to actually discuss like comic books are not high art. Calvin and Hobbes, because it discusses philosophy, is high art. But that's a comic book, like I don't even know what else to do. It's like, well, if you're not reading, Faust or like Shakespeare, like it's not high art. Because I had teachers in high school and stuff that it was like, oh my gosh, like high literature, blah blah blah. Hated it, which is ironic because I graduated with an English degree.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, it was in creative writing, but like a lot of the books that we were encouraged to read and a lot of the classes I had to take was actually looking at other things that were not considered quote unquote like high literature. And I think to me, what's fascinating is the reason I wonder if some of those books are heralded so much as being high art is because it's easier with how difficult some of them are and because they are technical, like it's written word and stuff like that. But it's kind of like a gatekeeping measure in itself. Like if you're holding the most difficult thing to understand, like if you can't read this book on quantum physics or whatever, you're not intelligent because you don't understand. It's like, okay, but read this narrative and tell me what's happening to this character in the story. Like,
and I mean, in some sense, it has been gatekeeping. It's a system artificially created, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think there is value in having a system of like, okay, these books are examples of really good dialogue, or these books are examples of when people use metaphor and simile really well.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean they're good books overall. Like,
definitely,
you could read a book and be like, I hated that book. I hated the characters and everything.
Yeah,
but you can appreciate it for what it actually did in its time or whatever.
Yeah.
But like, even in those instances, like I'm willing to concede and say like, I don't like this book, but I can see why this book was important or why this book pushed the boundaries of whatever.
Right.
But that's when he comes into comic books, he can't concede anything. Like, he doesn't say, okay, I recognize that Watchmen was on Time's top 100 novels of all time list alongside these other books, or stuff like that, where he acknowledges that comic books have been advancing and have been pushing the boundaries of what can and can't be literature.
Yeah.
So,
like, I literally, out there on my shelf, I have a graphic novel I had to do a project in college on. The novel's called Unflattening, and it was a philosophy or psychology major's thesis. So instead of like writing a thesis paper, he asked like, well, can I just do a graphic novel? And so he wrote and drew an entire graphic novel around philosophical, and it's
almost
trippy
more
and
work
it's
than
awesome.
writing the actual
thesis. No, exactly. But when you see some of the things, you're like, whoa, like this is intense, like in a really cool way. But to me, like, again, it's like, but it's just a picture book. But it's like, yeah, but it's grappling with really complex things.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the thing that is so funny is I think people, and it infuriates me about, especially like higher academics, so that like his whole college thing, like I have a lot of issues with how college is structured and just like there's so much loftiness going on where it's like, well, I'm a professional in understanding this. It's like, yeah, but you don't even know how to explain it. So like, I don't even think you're that smart. Like, yeah, you know a lot of stuff about this, but you can't distill that complex information down to me as someone who does not know to then understand it to the level that you do. That to me is a huge barrier in being able to communicate and just, and so with something like comics, you're taking all this information, so if you're looking at like a panel from Watchmen or from Spider-Man or Punisher, and you're like, I'm trying to communicate that Frank Castle is so elated killing this guy, but he doesn't want to, or he is trying to do this, and like, how do I do that with this image? And if I can look at that image and be like, oh dang, Frank Castle really wants to kill this guy, but he's not sure if he should, like, that's brilliance to me, that that you can communicate something to me through an image, through like drawing tears on his face or drawing a certain expression or using certain lighting or proportions or framing.
And a lot of the times it's literally like, it's just like TV or movie on paper.
Yeah, exactly.
And like, I'm sure he watches TV and movies. And like,
Bill Maher? No, never.
Yeah.
No, that just makes you dumb. He might vote for Trump then. God forbid. I can't watch TV.
And that, like, he never gets into that. Like, what do you enjoy? Or like, am I allowed to enjoy things that aren't considered like sophisticated or high art? Like, he never specifies like what is and isn't acceptable. And not that I need Bill Maher to tell me what is and isn't acceptable.
Right.
But if you're making a case for what isn't acceptable, you should probably tell us what you, the enlightened individual, think is acceptable. Like,
right, exactly.
I need to figure out what to do now because I've been
How am I
roasted.
supposed to change, Bill?
Yeah,
I don't know.
How am I supposed to change?
My whole life is a sham.
I don't know how to not vote for Donald Trump.
I started reading Spider-Man, and all I can think is build the wall, build
the college thing kind of reminded me because we took that manga or anime class, and like at face value, that class was kind of that thing for me. I was like, this just sounds like a cool blow-off class. Like, it's going to be easy. We just watch movies and analyze them. Yeah, it's awesome. But, like, I came out of that class learning a lot more than I ever had in any of my other religious studies classes because they took an interesting twist and an interesting spin and showed how people can use art and use mediums, non-traditional mediums like animated films and manga and stuff to like tell these extremely complex issues about environmental problems, about political issues, about religion, and like it's insane the amount of stuff that in like these Hayao Miyazaki movies and stuff that is religious that in America we're just like
yeah, exactly.
We don't really know anything. We're like,
oh, it's a giant wolf dog and he's running around.
Weird little spirits running around
exactly.
and like causing havoc, but like it's like a religious thing to a lot of people, and like
definitely
that class was kind of like one of these classes where like he would probably call it dumb. And for me, it was like, I don't want people to have to miss out on that kind of stuff because I think there is a case to be made against things like entertainment is entertainment. It doesn't need to be analyzed to death. It doesn't need to be this lofty high thing. Like, if you enjoy watching the dumbest, cheesiest sitcom in the world, just watch it. Enjoy it. Like, you don't have to justify these things to anybody, let alone Bill Maher. Like, it's kind of like, why do I have to walk through life feeling like I always have to justify whether like the things that I'm enjoying are like meaningful or whatever? And there are certain things like that because I don't want to waste my time watching. Like, for people like us, we don't like watching dumb, cheesy sitcoms
because I don't have time.
Because we just don't have enough time. We want to filter out our experiences and experience things. But a lot of the times we're experiencing pop culture not as entertainment, but as like trying to glean like experience or glean inspiration for our own thoughts and our own ideas.
Definitely.
And, like, sometimes that becomes work in itself. Like, I can't enjoy anything anymore because I'm always trying to like analyze and find things. And that's kind of our burden to bear. But I think the average person who likes watching superhero movies and likes Star Wars and DC and watches TV shows and stuff, it's just entertainment. It's fun. It's whatever. Like, it doesn't have to be high art or impactful or meaningful. And if they think it is, good. Like, you're allowed to decide what you think is meaningful and impactful to some extent. So
yeah, definitely. And it to me, the overall vibe of this whole blog post he wrote just kind of has the same feeling of he's imposing these implications on people who read and listen to these like quote unquote child mediums are dumbing themselves down. And how, which to me is like, it's kind of like the same argument of like video games cause violence in the real world. Lots of studies have proved that wrong. Lots of studies will probably prove wrong that like maybe certain things make people like more, I mean, there's definitely a reality of like desensitization in terms of, like the violence in media and things like that. But I think to say that like, it was like when, like sadly, like these shooters, they were like, oh, well, they have Call of Duty. Call of Duty causes violent actions. And people were like, what? Like,
what about the other 200,
yeah, like,
300,000 people?
Right. It's like, how many copies of this
Yeah.
game were sold? How many of these things happen? Okay, so that means that there's probably other things at play versus just this game being in their library. Like,
Yeah.
oh, did he drink Orange Crush? Maybe Orange Crush makes people do stuff. Like, I don't know. So I think with that too, it's like something that really, really, really stood out that I think is worth diving into is he acknowledges that like the average person is smarter in lots of ways than when like the 1940s. But even then, he points at like, the big night out was like the Three Stooges and a Carmen Miranda musical and stuff like that, as if it's like no, but you have to understand what the Three Stooges was at the time. Like, you have to understand these things in context. Like, if we went back and watched old movies, we're like, they didn't understand high art. This didn't have any special effects or anything. But his follow-up statement to that is the problem is we're using our smarts on stupid stuff. And just to kind of segue into maybe like a point where I actually kind of agree with him on is I think there is a level where I am 50-50 on that statement. I agree that I do think, and I mean, this is me. I know we were literally just saying like there are certain things that, if you like it, you like it. But there are certain things that I'm like, I don't think that's good for us. Like, I think of shows like The Bachelorette and The Bachelor. I hate that. It makes me infuriated. And
in my mind, like, I'm a pretty big individualist, so I say things like that because like, if you enjoy it, just enjoy it and don't care what anybody else thinks.
Right.
But that doesn't mean I think it's
I
good
like it,
or that
right.
like me conceding your individuality to enjoy what you like and want to do does not mean that I think it's
That's a
good.
great clarification.
I just don't think you're a stupid or dumb person for enjoying what you
I
enjoy.
don't know. No, I'm just kidding.
And maybe it depends. Like,
Yeah.
I just try not to do that because I know there's probably things that I think are cool or awesome. Like, I liked Batman vs Superman, but there's probably
Shame
people
on
out
you.
there who think I'm stupid for liking it.
You're the reason.
But at the same time, it's like, I really don't care.
Right.
Like, I sometimes I do, but I think the point is like you shouldn't care what
Mhm.
other people think. But
Yeah.
I think where we're going with this next topic, I agree with you probably. I'm probably 50-50 on it too.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where it's like, again, if you're going to make a statement like that, like, please give us examples, because I do think there are certain things that definitely should be off the air. Why are the Kardashians like our big American
honestly,
icon and things like that? Like,
This last part reads like he's commenting on reality television.
right,
not
exactly.
On comic
like
books.
not on comic books. I'm
Yeah.
like, dude, if you had put like keeping up with the Kardashians in that statement, I would have been like, thank God someone said it. But like,
maybe that's kind of where our arguments intersect with him.
Yeah.
Because in a way, like, okay, now we actually kind of agree with you in a sense, because if it can be the Kardashians, why can't it be comic books as well? That's
right.
pacifying the nation.
And I think, and this is where, and that's a really good question. I actually think there is a very big difference, and I'm curious to hear like your additional thoughts on this too. But I think the distinction for me of like people enjoying keeping up with the Kardashians versus reading something like Invincible, like the superhero comic, is when you're watching Keeping Up with the Kardashians, I'm watching a super rich, unrealistic family doing ridiculous things for my own enjoyment. Like, there is nothing, hopefully, that you are learning and getting out of that potentially to like challenge your thinking or to like do stuff.
I mean,
I could be wrong. Maybe you watch
that's kind of what I'm saying is like, you could argue the flip side with like, I'm reading The Punisher because I want to see this dope, strong dude just like
murder
wreck people and destroy them.
Sure.
Like, and sometimes that is why I watch Punisher or watch these things. Like, I'm not always like, that's kind of like the flip side of like, you don't have
That's
to
fair.
always go into things with a certain intent. Like,
yeah.
And I get what you're saying, because I think a lot of our culture is, and this is where I kind of agree with him on the political stuff, and maybe it's not the fault of the media, it's more the fault of the political process, but we don't need to get into that. But the idea that like people would rather watch Keeping Up with the Kardashians or watch Punisher or whatever than actually participate in civilized life or participate in
That's a good point.
politics.
Yep.
And I think I would probably agree with him on that because I'm one of those people who a lot of the time I would rather play a video game than keep up with all this nonsense that is going on.
Right.
And it's kind of, and I think that's kind of where he turns it at the end. And I kind of agree with that part.
Yeah.
But not with the fact that that's the majority of the people specifically with comic books.
Right.
Because I think there's a whole host of things that people are being distracted by. There's plenty of things to be distracted by. There's YouTube and reality TV and music. And like every type of medium probably has people who are way too invested in it and would rather do that than
like take care of their family, take care of themselves,
take care of their family,
their neighbor.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Or vote or
right.
whatever.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what I was alluding to earlier when I was saying that, you know, there are certain things to that level that I agree with him on, that it's like I do think there is too much escapism, and escapism as a way of like I'm literally running away from responsibility. Because I think
reality.
Because you had said earlier, like I do think certain levels of escapism of like I've just spent my whole day processing like business and numbers and graphic design and photography and all this stuff that I have to do tomorrow for 8 hours and things like that. I just want to spend an hour like drawing mindless pictures, or like I want to spend an hour going through dungeons in Diablo or shooting stuff in Gears of War. Like it's not that I need that forever to, you know, to sedate me, but there is a level of like just mentally detoxing from having to do a certain thing for 8 hours. But there's the flip side of people who do it the other proportion, where they do responsibility like an hour, and then they, you know, like, so now I'm going to go watch or play games for 12 hours a day and things like that. And I think that's a fair distinction, but
yeah, and it depends on your stage of life too. Like,
and that's again, and there's all these qualifiers that I think need to go into the things he's saying, and I think a lot of the things he's saying make for a very interesting discussion. It's just
that he's not willing
this
to have.
this 3-paragraph blog post should have been like a thesis paper, and there should have been all these things that I think
this could have been like 3 or 4 thesis papers.
Correct. Like there are some really deep
arguments
ideas in here. And I think to me, you know, like kind of poking back at him in a way, is I think he is part of the problem in our culture dumbing things down and like making big things overly simple, which is one of my biggest pet peeves in life ever.
Yep.
Like in anything, is when people just say like, oh, this is bad, you're with this, you're bad, I hate you, you're bad. Or like, oh, this is good, I am with this is good, this is good. It's like, no, it's complex. Like things are really, really complex. And so to just say like, nope, it's this or that is just unhelpful to me. And so like, I do think he makes, you know, the context in which he's saying them is not, I don't agree with, but the sentiment of like our world and I would totally bet that if I went to the majority of people, they would, like you said, okay, you can either watch the newest episode of The Office. Well, I guess you can watch 5 episodes of The Office or the next political debate. I would wager the majority of Americans would be like, especially in our current climate, would be like, yeah, I'm watching The Office.
Oh,
like
I would choose The Office.
Yeah, exactly. I don't even like The Office, and I would choose The Office.
And in my mind, like, and maybe this is just me, but in my mind, I'm not choosing The Office over the political debates because I'm like brainwashed into like wanting to escape from reality. It's more like I'm not interested in their debates
fruitless, exactly,
because I have watched them
exactly.
And it's dumb. Like
exactly.
It's fruitless. Or like I don't want to get into it because
no, totally,
because I've got opinions about our political process.
Right. No, but so
I think a lot of people aren't escaping the reality. They're more like, no, I've checked out. This is dumb. Like I've tried to participate.
Exactly.
And people just shout me down, or people
defriend me on Facebook because
I
don't
like
agree with them.
We can't have civilized discussions. And again, I'm not trying to like.
I'm towing the line very carefully because I know
I'm not
we're
trying
really
to grandstand
close.
and be one of those guys who's like, "Ma civility." Like everybody needs to be civil. Like there are instances where it's not appropriate to call for civility.
Yeah,
but
I agree.
I think like a lot of people are just not interested in participating, not because they want to escape and just don't want to acknowledge that our country is whatever. But I think it's because it's become such this weird machine that's like uninteresting anymore. Like,
when I
and
think
it doesn't have to be interesting, but it needs to be engaging. And I think a lot of people now, welcome to the political Punk's podcast. But
Yeah,
I think people
ironic,
don't
right?
feel engaged by that thing anymore. And so they're like, well, I'm just going to continue just living my life
Right.
as I would have lived it and pretend there is no debate on tonight. And I'm going to watch The Office like I did yesterday.
Right.
And it's kind of like we just don't even pay attention anymore.
Right. And when I think what's fascinating too, and this is like a very interesting psychological side that you could take too, is takes, for example, like they just did the Black Mirror live engagement thing.
Yep.
Where,
Bandersnatch.
yeah. Which to me, it's like, let's take that as like a very quick case study. That probably had more people interaction live than I would be really fascinated. Like, I'm just kind of talking out of my head, so like I don't have any proof of this, but it'd be really interesting to see if that had more live interaction than like last year's political debates or what the political debates did. Maybe this last election it was pretty close, just with like the magnitude of everything going on.
Well, I think a part of the problem is there's people like Bill Maher, and this is kind of one of his big issues too, which there's so many in here, but like
right.
people who are unwilling to step down to a level they perceive as lesser than themselves. And like, if you really want people to participate in the process, if you really want people to get on board and question things and like question our political system and question our society and kind of like ask big questions about things, then you need to come down to their level and not tell them they're stupid and what they're doing is dumb.
Right.
Because like Black Mirror, they create a really intense TV show that causes you to question things about politics and about society and about our interactions with people and technology. Like, that's a super intricate system that gets people to be interested in questions like that.
Right.
Saying stuff like this is not going to make anybody more interested in what you have to say.
I guarantee you people went out and bought more comic books because you said this.
This doesn't change people's minds, and this doesn't change people's interest in politics, because I think that's really what he's getting at here. He's saying people are being dumbed down and are no longer interested in politics,
or like
so then
things
people
that
get
matter.
voted in who shouldn't be voted in. But it's kind of like if you want those people to get engaged, then you should engage them on their level, not force them to come up to your like sophisticated high society,
right?
Like, because they're not going to, because they think you're dumb.
Well, and that's
that part of America is dying.
Yeah, no, definitely no. And I think my point of like kind of pushing at, I don't know, man. Like, I know we've just kind of like went in circles around this whole thing, and it's really complex because I think
we've kind of gone in a progression through his paragraphs here, because I think we've ended on. We went through like the college and the social, and we've ended on sort of the political thing. So
and this is the thing too. So like Gloria, so my wife, and I hope she's cool with me telling this story. I don't know why, but she's a teacher, and she taught the Black Panther comics like last year, like kind of like when the movie came out, and for her, so she teaches in a more urban setting, so there's a lot of students of color and stuff like that, and for her, like, that was the most engaged any of them had ever been, for a lot of them, because they were like, all of a sudden it's like we're not reading like Shakespeare anymore. Black Panther as a character and in his world and how Stan Lee wrote him and all the things that go into it relates to them. And like, you have like the narrative in the film with like Killmonger, that is more personal to them as students in their modern day to analyze and to dig into and think critically about than like Romeo and Juliet and like a bunch of horny kids in like an old 1400s book. Like it to me, it's just like to then say, well, Black Panther doesn't count because it's pictures. It's like,
no, I agree with you. I think, and I feel like that's what comics have really actually always been about. Like, a lot of Stan Lee's characters and stuff were struggling with different issues, like Peter Parker's uncle dying and the X-Men being oppressed by the country wanting to kill them, and thinking that they were other because they were mutants and they deserved to die, and like kind of like all of these complicated ideas that have always existed throughout history, and like comics have always tracked with that, and comics have always, and there's certain levels of pulpiness that you get throughout comics, and like some are just for entertainment and splash pages and awesome epic fight scenes, but there's nothing wrong with that. In the same vein, there's comics that can be considered high art and can be considered analyzable and different things, and it's like, is he ignoring the fact that there are terrible books? Like, is he ignoring the fact that what about like 50 Shades of Grey or Twilight? Like, none of that's sophisticated literature. So like, again, it comes back to he's not clarifying what he actually means.
Right.
And he really knows nothing about what he's
I
talking
just,
about here.
frankly, reading it, I was like, you just don't know anything.
Yeah.
Like, I can't even take this seriously, and it's funny because like in the comments, there's like close to 1,500 comments on that page, and people like lit him up. So it's
well, it's like he doesn't know his audience, because I feel like you're saying this to like his liberal audience. They're gonna be like, no, I don't agree with you. A lot of them probably, and like I feel like conservatives aren't really listening to him. So like,
right.
I don't know who he's actually talking to. So yeah, I don't know. That's about where my thoughts end on that. I think overall, I don't think I was really offended by it. Other than the only thing that was really offensive to me about it was the Stan Lee thing. Like, it's just unacceptable to post something like this in the wake of somebody dying, who is like clearly being like, it's not like he died and a couple people were like, but it was like clearly like the nation was celebrating, or at least in my corners of the world, like people were just like mourning and all this stuff about this guy dying, and he just comes out with this like, you guys are all dumb. It's basically like the guy who's like, why are you crying? You guys are dumb. Like,
yeah, exactly.
What is this? This didn't serve any purpose other than to get him attention, which,
right.
I mean, we're talking about it, so I guess it worked.
Right.
But it's just an example of like terrible arguments. Like, you need to clarify what you're actually talking about. You need to clarify your terms. You need to, I don't know.
It's funny because in a weird way, his whole article was kind of the antithesis of what we try to do when we're critiquing things on the podcast. Of like, if I'm gonna say I didn't like The Last Jedi, I'm not just gonna say like, because there was explosions. Explosions are for children. It's more like, no, there are big issues, and I'm pointing to things in the movie that are big issues, and I think this is why, and they should have done this instead. And even if other people disagree and people did like it, if I can say something that is pulling from the text and pulling from that actual thing and using examples, like even if I'm like wrong, or I just, there's certain people who saw it who just don't share the same opinion as me, like that's fine. At the end of the day, like it's not a big deal, because
it's critical
we saw
analysis.
The same movie.
Like, to some extent, it can be
analysis.
Objective, but most of the time it's going to be subjective.
Exactly.
To some extent.
But this was 100% fully unadulterated subjectivity without any evidence, which to me is like, I think Mr. Bear said, we've used this line a lot, but Mr. Bear said it on the episode we had him guest on, where you can be ignorant, you can have an opinion, but you can't have an ignorant opinion. And this, to me, to a T, unbelievably, was just a very, very ignorant opinion. And and I'd be, if you want to give kind of like your closing reason on this too, but the reason I think I really, really wanted to talk about it, other than just, poking at it and just kind of like really disarming it and saying it, is not to say like, yeah, because now we have the moral high ground, and not even to just get an episode out of it, but I think to say that like people out there are really bad at being objective and like looking at lots of things. And you have someone like Bill Maher, who has a huge platform on HBO and is out there just for attention. And so there's a lot of people that maybe buy into everything that he says. And I'm not saying just him. I'm saying if you lean right, if you lean left, if you like X type of movies or this certain genre of music. And part of this is to myself too, because I know I fall into the camp of being like, pop music is trash and don't listen to it because it's brainwashing. Like, I know I definitely fall in that sense too. But we're
still punks, yeah.
Yeah,
but we try and not be punks when we can.
Exactly. But I think talking about it is to say that like, think about it. Like, think before you speak. Like, at least like grapple with the complexity of things, and like don't be afraid to say like, yeah, this is what I think, but I know this is a big issue, and so like this is just kind of where I stand at the moment. Like, I think with a lot of the stuff that we talk about on the show, it's like, yeah, this is kind of our opinion on this movie or this thing, and like, yeah, I know there's a lot of people who disagree, but like that's fine. Like, it's not a big deal. But it's just be okay with like talking through difficult stuff, and like just chill. Like, just talk about it. Think it through. Have good arguments. Think critically. Don't dive in head first, fist swinging, if you don't know anything about a topic.
Yeah.
That's a really good way to look really, really foolish at the end of the day. And I mean, this is just one of those things where it's like, don't be this guy. Like, above all things, the whole reason
I think that's
we
partially
started this,
why we did this episode, was like, just this is the opposite of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think like for me, did you have anything else to say?
I think that's pretty much it. Don't be
Okay.
Bill Maher.
Yeah.
That's my
I was
closing
gonna say
word.
a similar thing of like, the reason I wanted to do this video was because it's the opposite of what I've been trying to learn to do the past
100%.
4 to 6 years. Because I think like I used to be like this in some sense, like with pop music and with different things. As like, if you like pop music, you're trash, or like all pop music is garbage, all folk music is garbage, just because I liked this thing and they liked that thing and I perceived it to be bad. And I think even just by doing the podcast, it's taught me to step back a little bit and kind of look at things. And it's like, it doesn't mean I have to listen to pop music, but I can acknowledge there actually probably is some good pop music out there that's like pushing the boundaries of the genre. It's just the stuff you hear is the stuff that's really catchy and just whatever. But it's kind of like being able to step back a little bit and say, okay, I might not be right, and there might be a spectrum of level of complexity in this genre of music that I've pigeonholed for this long of time, or whatever you have with whatever. And there are certain things where I'm a little bit less willing to concede, like reality television and stuff.
I 100%.
But
agree.
I know plenty of people who enjoy reality television, so like it's one of those things where if you enjoy it and it's the way you unwind at the end of the day, then do what you got to do.
Yeah.
But don't try and tell me it's like high art or anything, because
Right.
I'll Bill Maher you.
I will Bill Maher you hard, dude.
But I think the important thing is, like, you can say stuff like Bill Maher is saying. You're allowed to say stuff like this, but you have to be able to back it up.
Yes.
Like, you have to actually give arguments and reasons for the things you're saying. Like, I could see writing something like this, but actually giving reasons behind things and kind of justifying whatever. But, like, he just doesn't give us anything.
Yeah.
He just tells us his opinion, and
then says
it's
that
a blog,
if
I
you
guess,
think-
so you're allowed to do whatever you want on your blog. But
right. And again,
people are
it's-
going to tell you you're wrong.
Exactly. And again, to your point, I think what makes this so, like, reading it again so laughably hilarious is that there's just no evidence. There's nothing.
Yep.
There's no substance here. And even the times that we said, like, yeah, I kind of agree with him, we had to preface with saying, like, but it's only because I'm taking the concept and spinning it towards what I think he should have been addressing. Whereas, like, for some of this stuff, you're like, if I just, like, read this, I don't agree with a single thing contextually that he says here. But there are certain things where it's like, yeah, I agree that our culture can dip too heavily into escapism, and we don't like to encourage people to be responsible adults.
Yeah.
I think that we do have an affinity to dive way more into the things that give us, like, pleasure and are more fun than to do things that are actually good for the world. Like, I totally think that's a reality. But when you blame it on comics, then you lose me. You know, versus
There's all the other stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what about the
what about
other
pop
three?
music that tells us life is a party all the time?
Right,
Or what
exactly,
about reality
exactly.
TV that makes us believe that reality is something other than it is? And pretty much anything there is, there's going to be
there's
people
a
who have that
bajillion
as their
things.
vice.
Exactly.
Like-
There's a bajillion things, socially acceptable and unsocially acceptable, that fall into that category of taking us away from responsibilities and doing these things. And so, with the crux of the thesis of this 3-paragraph argument being, it's
only
comic
comics
books'
are
fault.
to blame.
It's like, you're an idiot. Like, that's literally
Yeah.
like, idiot. But I don't know. That's pretty much the gist. Otherwise, we'll just kind of go in circles. I think just, like, the big thing I want people to take away in looking at this is, 1, don't be Bill Maher. And 2, just, like, this is a majority of the world in every sphere, like it or not. And it's sad. And that's one of the reasons we're really trying to do this show and, like, create a positive vibe, even if we're challenging and, like, thinking through and that's, like, where the whole moshing idea came from. Is it's like, yeah, I'm gonna push you over, but I'll pick you back up and we'll laugh it off. And, like,
it's
just
creating a circle of, like, there's nothing wrong with criticizing things and questioning things and pushing things if you're doing it with the intent of finding out, like
just understanding.
if you're doing it
towards with it,
towards an understanding of, like, reality and truth and whatever
right,
grandstanding words you want to say, like, there's nothing wrong with criticizing,
right.
but it always comes back to, well, what is your actual evidence? Because if you don't have any evidence, then it's kind of hard for other people to argue with you.
Right. And what's your goal too? Like,
and that's why we're going in circles, because
yeah,
like, he's got nothing here.
right. And it's like, and what's your goal too? Bill Maher's goal was definitely not to have a nuanced argument against escapism via the medium of comics. That was not his argument. His argument was, people voted for Trump because they read Spider-Man. Like, that's been, like, you know, and that's kind of like where our joke came in of, like, you know, in the beginning is, it's like, if you were to distill any of these other main concepts down, you would sound very foolish. And it's like, are you criticizing something because you think it could be better, or are you criticizing something because there is a moral, like, you gain a social moral credit from doing so, and
which
this
is why he's
100% very. It's very clear that's
so.
What he did.
I wanted to close out with this dope C.S. Lewis quote I found.
Go for it.
About the concept of adult. I thought it was a good rebuttal to this.
Yeah, that sounds great.
So this is by C.S. Lewis. I don't remember what book it was from. I didn't figure it out in my cursory search, but it doesn't really matter that much. Critics who treat adult as a term of approval instead of as merely descriptive term cannot be adult themselves. To be concerned about being growing up, to admire the grown up because it is grown up, to blush at the suspicion of being childish, these things are the marks of childhood and adolescence. And in childhood and adolescence, they are, in moderation, healthy symptoms. Young things ought to want to grow. But to carry on into middle life or even into early manhood, this concern about being adult is a mark of really arrested development. When I was 10, I read fairy tales in secret and would have been ashamed if I had been found doing so. Now that I am 50, I read them openly. When I became a man, I put away childish things, including the fear of childishness and the desire to be very grown up.
Love it.
I like that quote.
Mic drop.
Yeah.
C.S. Lewis. He's the man.
Yep.
Cool. Well, with that, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for sticking with our rambling and our yammer-nons on HBO commentators and all that good stuff. But
let us know your thoughts.
Let us know your thoughts.
Rebuttals.
We'd love to keep this discussion going, because I'm sure like variations of the topic will, be spawned into new episodes. Kind of, we hinted at some bigger ideas. I think specifically with this episode, we wanted to kind of poke at some of the things that were actually Bill Maher's statements, and we didn't want to misrepresent him. But you can find our future episodes and our old library on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, YouTube, and Spotify. You can also follow us on Instagram at PopCulturePunks on both platforms, and you can email any show suggestions to popculturepunks@gmail.com, or you can DM us on Twitter. You can follow Phil and I individually on Twitter and Instagram at I am Phil Sorensen and at JK in Pop Culture. And if you'd be interested in purchasing any merch to help support the show, you can find all those things on Redbubble, Threadless, and I might be throwing up a Teespring at some point just to have another platform. So I bought a ton of T-shirts from Redbubble. I've gotten...
They're pretty high quality.
They're really high quality.
And the thing hasn't faded yet on mine, so...
Yep. And if there's any designs you'd like to see or things that would be cool, just shoot them my way. I'll see what I can do. We do have the Posy Vibes Punk Fist or Punk Rock Hands T-shirt.
Still need to buy that.
Same. And so that's where you can find those things.
Also, a special thanks to whoever copped one of our shirts off Redbubble.
Yeah, so shout out to you. We appreciate it.
We don't know who you are, but
we
thanks.
don't know who you are. So thanks for tuning in. Next week, which will be the last episode of the month, we will be covering Gears of War 1 through 3. If you're interested, be on the lookout on our Facebook page. Oh, we're also on Facebook. Sorry, that was the other one.
Which
I
is
forgot.
the same at Pop Culture Punks.
Pop Culture Punks.
I don't know how Facebook works, but I think you can just search that.
It's all good. So definitely check that out and keep your eyes open. I'm going to be, or Phil, I guess, is going to be posting the links for those 2 YouTube videos. Those, even if you didn't have a chance to play the games Gears of War, I highly recommend watching them. I think the longest one is like maybe 15 minutes, and it dives really deep into the lore and the history and a lot of the things that kind of are underlying the Gears of War games. And frankly, it's really fascinating, like really, really, really interesting.
Especially if you're into like sci-fi type stuff.
But there's also a lot of like political undertones and kind of like it's just very cool. So I'm actually really excited for our discussion, because I've already had some thoughts come up of like, was the Gears of War franchise actually like a metaphor for something bigger? But yeah, until then, we'll catch you next week, and we bid you a fond, childish cowabunga. Childish-sized cowabunga.
That fly.